Ambassador Hana stood in the center of the great circular chamber, surrounded by beings that looked nothing like her. Above her head floated the crystalline form of Counselor Thelvan, its body made of living light that shifted colors with its emotions. To her left, a massive, water-filled sphere contained Ambassador Kell of the Thalorn people, his tentacles moving slowly in the artificial ocean. On her right, a containment field held the gaseous cloud that was Representative Vash of the Vaylith, constantly swirling and reforming. 3 years ago, Hana had stood in this same chamber. She had presented Earth's application to join the Galactic Coalition. She had shown them humanity's achievements, its art, its science, its desire for peace. The Council had rejected Earth without hesitation. They called humans too primitive, too violent, too short-lived to matter. They said Earth was a death world, a nightmare planet that should never have produced intelligent life. They wanted nothing to do with humanity. Now, they were begging. "The Vrex swarm has taken the Helion system," Thelvan said, its voice like wind chimes. 3 billion Lumine souls lost in 4 days. Our fleet cannot stop them. They consume everything. They leave nothing behind. Hana watched the holographic display in the chamber's center. It showed the Vrex advance across Coalition space. Red markers indicated destroyed worlds. There were dozens of them. The insectoid ships moved like a plague, overwhelming everything in their path. "We have tried everything," Kell said, his voice bubbling through his sphere's speakers. "Our weapons are superior. Our shields are stronger. But they do not care about losses. For every ship we destroy, 10 more take its place. They are willing to die. We are not. You said humans were too violent to join civilized society," Hana replied, keeping her voice calm. "You said we came from a world too harsh, that our short lifespans made us reckless. You said we were barbarians." The chamber fell silent. The 3 council members seemed to shrink, though none of them actually moved. "We were wrong," Thelvan finally said, the words clearly painful. "We need soldiers. We need beings who understand warfare. We need Deathworlders." Hana allowed herself a small smile. "What are you offering?" "Full coalition membership," Vash said quickly, its gas cloud turning a desperate orange. "Access to all our technology, trading rights across all systems. Whatever you want." "And respect," Hana added. "You will treat humans as equals. No more talk of primitive barbarians. No more discrimination. Our people fight and die as coalition citizens, with all the rights that brings." Thelvan's light flickered. "Agreed. How soon can your forces arrive?" 2 weeks to assemble the fleet, 3 weeks to reach your front lines." Hana turned to leave, then paused. "And Counselor, we're not barbarians. We're survivors. There's a difference." On Earth, in the military complex beneath the Korean peninsula, Captain Taemin Kang studied the tactical reports with growing concern. The Vrex were unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced. They had no fear, no hesitation, no sense of self-preservation. They simply attacked until they won or died trying. "It's like fighting a natural disaster," Lieutenant Nari Choi said, reading over his shoulder. She was the chief medical officer assigned to his ship, the UNS Indomitable. Her dark eyes scanned the casualty reports from coalition battles. "The aliens lose 1 ship and retreat. The Virex lose 100 and keep coming. The coalition species evolved on paradise worlds," Taemin said, pulling up images of their home planets. "Look at this. Lumini Prime has no predators. The weather is stable year-round. The Thalorn homeworld has no land masses, just peaceful oceans. The Vaylith live in gas giants where nothing can hurt them." "And we evolved on Earth," Nari finished. She didn't need to say more. "Earth, where everything was trying to kill you, where hurricanes could level cities and earthquakes could swallow towns. Where diseases jumped between species and predators lurked everywhere. where the very air humans breathed slowly poisoned their cells, aging them toward death. Sergeant Hyun Park entered the briefing room, his Marine's boots echoing on the metal floor. He was a veteran of the corporate wars, the conflicts that had nearly destroyed Earth before the nations finally united. His face was scarred, his eyes hard. "Captain, the 5th Marines are ready for deployment. 2,000 soldiers, fully equipped." "The coalition doesn't understand what they're asking for," Dr. Mireille Song said. The xenobiologist had been studying alien psychology for years. "They think we're going to fight like them, carefully, cautiously, minimizing losses." Taman shook his head. "We fight to win, whatever it takes." The human fleet departed 2 weeks later. 5 warships, built with Earth's brutal engineering standards, ships designed to take damage and keep fighting, ships that could pull maneuvers no alien vessel could survive because human bodies could withstand forces that would crush other species. Ships crewed by people who had an average lifespan of 90 years, not the 900 years of the Lumini or the 1,000 years of the Thalorn. During the 3-week journey, the crew studied Vrek's tactics obsessively. They watched battle recordings, analyzed attack patterns, identified weaknesses. What they saw disturbed them. "The coalition fights at maximum range," Taman explained to his officers. "They never close to weapons range if they can help it. They retreat the moment they take casualties. They treat every loss as a tragedy that requires weeks of mourning." "They've never had to fight for survival," Hyun said flatly. "They've never faced an enemy that wanted to exterminate them. They think war is a gentleman's game with rules." "The Vreks don't follow rules," Nari added. She had been reviewing the biological data on the insectoid species. "They're a hive mind. Individual deaths mean nothing. They'll sacrifice 1,000 ships to destroy one coalition vessel because they know the coalition can't accept those losses." Dr. Mireille pulled up a comparison chart. "A Lumini captain who loses their ship is considered to have failed their entire civilization. The shame is so great that many commit suicide. A Thalorn commander who loses 50 crew members will resign and spend years in psychological counseling. The Valith consider any military casualty to be a sign that their planning was inadequate." "And humans?" one of the junior officers asked. "We build monuments to our dead and keep fighting," Taman said quietly. "We've been doing it for thousands of years." On the final day of the journey, Taman called his crew together. 200 people stood in the Indomitable's main hangar, with thousands more watching on screens throughout the ship. They were young and old, experienced and fresh from training. They came from every nation on Earth, united under one flag. "The aliens think they're hiring mercenaries," Taman told them. "They think we're desperate for their technology, their acceptance, their place in galactic society. They're wrong. We're not here for them. We're here because someone called for help. And on Earth, we answer." He paused, looking at their faces. "We're going to see things that will haunt us. We're going to fight battles that seem impossible. We're going to lose people we care about. The aliens will watch us and think we're crazy, reckless, maybe even suicidal. Let them think that. We know the truth." "We're from Earth," Nari said, standing beside him. "We know how to survive." "We know how to fight," Hyun added. "And we know how to win," Dr. Mireille finished. The crew roared their approval, the sound echoing through the metal corridors. Outside the ship, space was cold and empty and infinite. But inside, humanity burned with the fire that had carried them from caves to cities to stars. The UNS Indomitable and its sister ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Callus system. Before them, a battle raged. Coalition ships retreated in orderly formations, while Vrek's bioships surged forward like a tide of teeth and claws. Evacuation transports fled toward the jump points, overloaded with refugees. Taman watched the tactical display and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "All ships, battle stations, We're going in. The galaxy was about to learn what Deathworlders could do. The Coalition fleet was dying. Taman could see it clearly on the tactical display. 12 massive Lumini battleships retreated in perfect formation, their shields flickering under Vrek's fire. They moved slowly, carefully, making sure no ship was left behind or exposed to additional danger. It was the most organized retreat Taman had ever seen. It was also exactly the wrong strategy. "The Vreks are hurting them," Lieutenant Nari said from the medical station. "They're not trying to destroy the Coalition ships. They're pushing them away from the evacuation transports." She was right. While the Coalition fleet retreated in good order, maintaining their defensive positions, the Vrek's swarms simply flowed around them. Hundreds of smaller bioships ignored the warships entirely and headed straight for the defenseless transport vessels carrying refugees. "Captain, incoming transmission from Coalition Fleet Command," the communications officer reported. Admiral Thelvan appeared on the main screen, its crystalline form pulsing with stress colors Taman had never seen before. "Captain Kang, welcome to Callus Prime. We are executing Evacuation Protocol 7. Please take up position in the rear guard formation. We will provide you with proper tactical procedures." "Negative," Taman said. "We're going after those Vrek ships attacking the transports." The bridge fell silent. Even the Coalition admiral seemed frozen in shock. "That would require moving through the Vrek's formation," Thelvan said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "You would take heavy damage. Your ships might be destroyed. This is not acceptable." "We didn't come here to hide behind formations," Taman replied. "All human ships, follow my lead. Attack pattern Delta. Maximum acceleration." He cut the transmission before the Admiral could protest. The UNS Indomitable lurched forward, its engines pushing far beyond what Coalition designers thought was safe. The 4 other human warships followed in a tight formation. They dove straight into the swarm of Vrek's bioships like knives into flesh. The Vrek's weapons were biological, firing acid and razor-sharp projectiles grown from their own bodies. They hit the Indomitable's hull hard. Armor plates melted. Internal systems sparked and failed. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. "Hull breach on decks 7 and 8, the damage control officer reported. "Sealing bulkheads now." "Keep going," Taman ordered. On a Coalition ship, a hull breach would trigger an immediate retreat for repairs. Crew members would need time to process the trauma. Medical teams would need to treat everyone for shock. The entire vessel would withdraw from combat. The Indomitable sealed the damaged sections and kept fighting. Taman watched the tactical display with cold focus. The Vrek's ships were fast and numerous, but they attacked in predictable patterns. They swarmed like insects, which made sense because they were insects. They surrounded prey and overwhelmed it with numbers. "Target the command nodes," he said, "the big ones in the center of each swarm." Human weapons, crude by Coalition standards but brutally effective, tore into the Vrek's formation. Railguns fired solid metal slugs at a fraction of light speed. Missile pods launched swarms of self-guided explosives. Energy weapons, copied from Coalition designs but pushed to dangerous power levels, cut through bioship armor. The Indomitable pulled a hard turn that would have killed any Coalition crew. Inside the ship, humans grunted against the acceleration, their bones creaking under 8 times Earth's gravity. It hurt. Some people passed out. But the ship turned, and its weapons kept firing. Sergeant Hyun watched from the marine deck as his display showed Vrek's ships breaking apart under human fire. "They're not used to this," he said to his squad leaders. "They're used to enemies that run." He was right. The Vrek swarm started to scatter. Without anything running from them, they didn't know what to do. They were predators facing prey that fought back. The 5 human warships carved through the Vrek's formation and reached the transport vessels. The aliens aboard those ships, mostly Thalorn refugees, watched in amazement as the small human fleet positioned itself between them and certain death. All transports, jump to safety, Taman ordered. We'll hold them here. Captain, the communications officer said quietly, Admiral Thelvan is requesting to speak with you. It sounds urgent. Taman accepted the call. The Admiral's crystalline form was pulsing rapidly, shifting through colors that Dr. Mirai later explained meant extreme confusion and distress. Captain Kang, you have taken damage to your vessel. Your crew is in danger. You must retreat for repairs and counseling. We're still fighting, Taman said simply. But your ship is wounded. Your people are traumatized. This is not how civilized beings wage war. Admiral, with respect, you're losing. Your protocols, your procedures, your civilized warfare, the Vreks don't care about any of it. They care about eating your planets and killing your people. We can't beat them by following your rules. The transmission ended. Taman wasn't sure if the Admiral had cut it off or simply stopped comprehending what he was saying. The battle continued for 6 more hours. By the end, the Indomitable had taken damage to 40% of its hull. The ship looked like it had been through a grinder. 2 other human vessels were in similar condition, but they had saved the transports. 30,000 Thalorn refugees escaped to safety. The cost was 12 dead and 37 wounded among the human crews. Lieutenant Nari worked in the medical bay without stopping. The Coalition had sent a Lumini observer to monitor human medical procedures, a crystalline being named Thelvas, who floated near the ceiling in shock. Nari moved from patient to patient with efficient speed. She set broken bones, sealed wounds, administered painkillers. One Marine had lost an arm when a bulkhead collapsed. Nari stopped the bleeding, stabilized him, and sent him to surgery, all in under 5 minutes. How are you still functioning? Thelvas asked, its voice high and strained. You have been working for 18 hours without rest. This is impossible. I once worked a 30-hour shift during the Lagos epidemic, Nari said, not looking up from her current patient. This is bad, but I've seen worse. But you are emotionally devastated. How can you function? Nari finally paused and looked at the alien. I'm sad that people died. I'm angry that we couldn't save everyone. But those feelings don't stop me from doing my job. They remind me why the job matters. Thelvas left the medical bay shortly after, completely unable to process what it had witnessed. That evening, Sergeant Hyun gathered his Marines in the main hangar. The space was scarred and blackened from battle damage. 12 flag-draped containers held the bodies of the fallen. The sergeant stood before them, his face hard, but his eyes wet. We came here to fight, he said. These 12 understood that. They knew the risks. They went anyway because someone needed help. He paused, struggling with emotion. We honor them by remembering their sacrifice. We honor them by finishing what we started. We honor them by saving more lives tomorrow than we lost today. The Marines stood in silence for exactly 60 seconds. Then Hyun dismissed them, and they went to repair the ship and prepare for the next battle. A group of Coalition officers watched from the observation deck above. They had expected to see humans destroyed by grief, unable to continue. They had expected ceremonies that would last for days, counseling that would take weeks, a fleet that would need to withdraw and recover. Instead, they saw soldiers who mourned deeply, but briefly. Who honored their dead and then prepared to fight again, who treated death as terrible but not unexpected. How do they do this? A Thalorn commander whispered. How do they keep going? Admiral Thelvan had come to the Indomitable personally. The crystalline being floated onto the bridge, where Taman was reviewing damage reports and planning the next engagement. Captain Kang, I must understand. You lost 12 people today. On any Coalition vessel, this would be a catastrophe. The crew would be traumatized for months, but your people are already preparing for another battle. How? Taman leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking very tired. Admiral, do you know how many wars Earth has fought? How many times we've nearly destroyed ourselves? How many billions have died in stupid, pointless conflicts? Thelvan's light dimmed. The records say thousands of wars. We learned something from all that death, Taman continued. We learned that grief is real and pain is real, but they don't have to stop us. We learned that the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living. We learned that sometimes survival means fighting even when you're hurt. This is what you meant by Death World, the Admiral said slowly. Not that your planet tried to kill you, but that it taught you how to keep going even after loss. Earth never gave us a choice, Taman said. Adapt or die, fight or perish. We chose to survive. We've been choosing it every day for millions of years. The Admiral floated there for a long moment, processing this. Finally, it spoke again. I see now why the Council was wrong to reject you. We thought you were uncivilized because you accepted death. We did not understand that accepting death is what allows you to fight for life. Will you let us fight our way? Taman asked. Yes, and perhaps you can teach us to fight as well. Outside the ship, space was cold and empty. But inside, in the corridors and crew quarters, humans rested and recovered. They grieved for their fallen friends. They tended their wounds. And they prepared for tomorrow's battle, because that's what Deathworlders did. They survived. 6 weeks after their arrival, the human fleet had fought in 17 battles. They had won all of them. News spread across the coalition faster than light itself. The Deathworlders were winning where everyone else had failed. Requests for human tactical advisors flooded in from every sector. Dr. Mireille stood before a room full of coalition military commanders. The audience included representatives from all 3 major species and dozens of minor ones. They had come to Station Meridian, the coalition's central command, to understand how humans fought so effectively. Most of them looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. You asked me to explain how humans wage war, Mireille began, pulling up images of Earth. To understand that, you must first understand where we come from. The holographic display showed Earth from space. It looked beautiful, blue and green and white. Then the view zoomed in. Hurricanes churned across oceans. Earthquakes split continents. Volcanoes poured ash into the sky. Tsunamis crashed into coastlines. Earth's gravity is 40% higher than galactic standard, Mireille explained. Every human you meet has spent their entire life fighting to stand upright. Our bones are denser. Our muscles are stronger. Our hearts work harder just to keep blood flowing. She changed the display to show Earth's wildlife. Lions hunting prey, bears protecting cubs, sharks circling in deep water, snakes with venom that could kill in minutes. On most coalition worlds, large predators went extinct millions of years ago, Mireille continued. On Earth, we share our planet with thousands of species that can kill us. We evolved not as apex predators, but as persistent survivors. We learned to use tools, to work together, to never give up. A Lumini commander raised a crystalline appendage. But surely your civilization has eliminated these dangers? Mireille smiled sadly. Last year, a hurricane destroyed a city of 2 million people. We rebuilt it. 3 years ago, an earthquake killed 50,000 in the European sector. We mourned and moved on. 5 years ago, a new disease emerged that killed hundreds of thousands before we developed a cure. We fight our planet every single day, and every day some of us lose. The room was silent. Coalition species had eliminated natural disasters centuries ago. They controlled their weather. They stabilized their geology. They engineered their ecosystems. The idea of living with constant danger was foreign to them. But the most important thing, Mireille said quietly, is our lifespan. The average human lives 90 years. You live 10 times that long. When one of us dies, we lose decades. When one of you dies, you lose centuries. That's why you can't accept casualties. Every loss is a massive portion of your civilization's future. And for humans, a Thalorn admiral asked. We learned that death is inevitable. So we focus on making our short lives matter. We fight not because we want to die, but because we want to live. And we know that sometimes the only way to survive is to risk everything. After the presentation, Admiral Thelvan approached Mirai privately. What you described sounds like torture. How can you call such a place home? Mirai looked at the hologram of Earth still floating in the room. Because it's ours. Because it made us who we are. Because every human alive is descended from millions of generations who refuse to give up. Earth is hard, Admiral, but it taught us something valuable. It taught us that we're stronger than we think. While Dr. Mirai educated coalition leadership, Private Yuna Han was proving that Deathworld thinking could change everything. She was a combat engineer, small and quiet, easily overlooked. But she had grown up in the deep space stations around Mars, working in conditions that would kill most coalition species. Zero gravity, extreme temperatures, constant danger. When human forces captured intact scans of a Vrex hive structure, Yuna studied them obsessively. She saw something no one else had noticed. The Vrex built their ships like their bodies, with vital organs deep inside, protected by layers of expendable tissue. We've been fighting them wrong, she told Sergeant Hyun. We shoot at their outside and they just grow more armor. We need to get inside. We need to cut out their heart. Hyun looked at the young private with new respect. That's a suicide mission. Fighting inside a Vrex bioship means close combat. No room to maneuver. Acid atmosphere. Hostile biology trying to kill us. I know, Yuna said, but it's the only way to kill them efficiently. She was right, but that didn't make the mission any less terrifying. Hyun selected 15 volunteers from his best Marines. Yuna would lead them into the belly of a Vrex command ship. If they succeeded, they might capture invaluable intelligence. If they failed, they would die in one of the most horrible ways imaginable. The boarding craft approached the Vrex vessel during a larger battle. While Coalition and human ships engaged the enemy fleet, the small shuttle slipped through the chaos unnoticed. It latched onto the bioship's hull like a parasite. Shaped charges burned through the living tissue. The Marines poured inside. The interior of the Vrex ship was a nightmare. The walls breathed. The floors pulsed. The air was thick with spores and heat. Warrior form Vrex rushed at them through organic corridors that closed and opened like arteries. Yuna moved through the horror with calm focus. She had studied the scans. She knew where the command node would be. The Marines followed her, firing their weapons at the chittering horrors that emerged from every shadow. Left here, Yuna said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Another 50 meters. A massive Vrex warrior, 3 meters tall with bladed limbs, dropped from the ceiling. It killed 2 Marines before Hyun put a plasma charge through its head. The creature's acid blood sprayed across the corridor, burning everything it touched. Keep moving, Hyun shouted. They reached the command node 15 minutes after entry. It was a chamber filled with pulsing tissue and strange growths. In the center, a massive brain-like structure coordinated the entire ship. Yuna placed demolition charges with careful precision, while the others held off waves of Vrex defenders. Charges set, she said. We have 2 minutes. They ran. Behind them, the Vrex ship's immune system finally recognized the infection. The corridors started closing. Warrior forms poured in from every direction. The Marines fired everything they had, falling back step by step. They made it to the boarding craft with 30 seconds to spare. As the shuttle pulled away, the charges detonated. The Vrex command ship convulsed, its coordination destroyed. It drifted helplessly while Coalition vessels tore it apart. But the mission's true value wasn't the destroyed ship. It was what Yuna had done before placing the charges. She had downloaded the command node's data core. Every Vrex plan, every fleet position, every tactical doctrine was now in Coalition hands. The intelligence changed the entire war. Within days, Coalition forces were hitting Vrex supply lines, ambushing their fleets, disrupting their communications. The tide of battle shifted. The Coalition awarded Yuna their highest military honor, the Star of Valor. She accepted it in a ceremony aboard Station Meridian, still covered in healing burns from the acid atmosphere of the Vrex ship. Coalition officers watched in amazement as the young human stood at attention despite her injuries, showing no sign of pain. "How can she function while wounded?" a Valith commander whispered. "She's from a death world," another replied. "Pain doesn't stop them." But the most important change wasn't tactical or strategic. It was philosophical. Coalition officers started requesting assignment to human vessels. They wanted to learn the Death World doctrine. Most of them couldn't handle it. The high gravity crushed them. The stress overwhelmed them. The constant danger broke them. But some succeeded. A young Lumini commander named Thelkar spent 3 months aboard the Indomitable. He learned to function in 1.4 gravities. He learned to make decisions under fire. He learned that acceptable losses were sometimes necessary for victory. When he returned to the Coalition fleet, he fought differently. He took calculated risks. He accepted damage to achieve objectives. His crew struggled to adapt, but they learned. And they started winning battles they would have lost before. The change spread. Coalition commanders who had trained with humans began teaching others. Slowly, painfully, the Coalition military transformed. They learned that survival sometimes required sacrifice. They learned that fear was just data, not a reason to quit. They learned that death, while tragic, was not the end of everything. 3 months after humanity's arrival, Admiral Thelvan gave a speech to the entire Coalition fleet. "We called the humans Deathworlders as an insult. We thought they were barbaric because they accepted death. We were wrong. They are not barbaric. They are survivors, and they are teaching us to survive as well." The Admiral's words reached every ship, every station, every world in Coalition space. For the first time in the war, species that had been retreating for years started to believe they could win. Taman watched the speech from the Indomitable's bridge. Beside him, Nari smiled. "They're learning." "Slowly," Taman said. "But yes." "Will it be enough?" she asked. Taman looked at the tactical display. The Vrex were still out there, still dangerous, still hungry. But now, the red markers showing lost worlds had stopped advancing. The blue markers of Coalition forces were holding their ground. Some were even pushing forward. "It has to be," he said, "because if they don't learn, we all die." Outside the ship, the stars burned cold and distant. But inside, humans and aliens worked side by side, preparing for the next battle. The galaxy was learning what it meant to be a Deathworlder. Not that death didn't matter, but that it couldn't stop those determined to survive. The real war was just beginning. But for the first time, the Coalition had a chance to win it. The Vrex were learning too. That was the problem. Their hive mind processed every battle, every tactic, every loss. They studied the humans who had changed the balance of the war, and they decided that humanity was the critical threat that needed to be eliminated. Intelligence reports reached Station Meridian 3 weeks before the attack. The Vrex were gathering their forces. Not just a swarm or a fleet, but their entire remaining military strength. 12,000 bioships were converging on the Aegis line, the network of fortified systems that protected the Coalition's core worlds. And according to captured communications, their primary target was the human fleet. Captain Taman studied the projections in the war room. Admiral Thelvan floated beside him, along with commanders from every Coalition species. The holographic display showed the coming battle. The numbers were overwhelming. "They will hit us with everything they have," Thelvan said, its crystalline body pulsing with stress colors. Even with all our forces combined, we are outnumbered 10-1. Then we make every ship count, Taman replied. Captain, I must ask something. The Admiral's light shifted to a color that Mirai had taught Taman meant deep discomfort. In your military history, have you ever asked for volunteers for missions where survival was unlikely? The room went quiet. Every coalition officer turned to look at Taman. Yes, he said simply. And did people volunteer? Always. Thelvan seemed to shimmer with confusion. Why? Why would anyone choose certain death? Taman thought about all the history he had studied. The soldiers who held lines against impossible odds, the pilots who flew damaged aircraft away from populated areas, the medics who stayed with wounded under fire, the engineers who sealed reactor breaches knowing they wouldn't escape. Because someone had to, he said. Because their death would save others. Because they believed some things were worth dying for. We do not have this concept, a Thalorn commander said quietly. We cannot ask our people to sacrifice themselves. It is not in our culture. Then we'll ask ours. Taman turned to Lieutenant Nari, who had been listening silently. Sound the call. Full crew meeting. Everyone who can be spared from their stations. An hour later, 2,000 humans gathered in the main hangar of Station Meridian. They came from all 5 warships. They were Marines and engineers, doctors and pilots, veterans, and new recruits. Taman stood before them on a hastily assembled platform. You all know what's coming, he began. The Vareks are bringing everything they have. We're going to hold the Aegis line, but it's going to be the hardest fight we've ever faced. Some of the operations we need to run have low survival chances. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I need volunteers. He paused, looking at their faces. If you volunteer, you'll be assigned to boarding teams that will hit Vrex command ships during the battle. You'll be on ships that will hold position against overwhelming force. You'll be in positions where rescue might not be possible. I can't promise you'll come home. The hangar was silent. Coalition observers watched from the upper levels, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Taman was asking people to die. In coalition culture, this was the greatest taboo. You didn't ask someone to sacrifice themselves. You didn't put anyone in positions where death was likely. I need 600, Taman said. Hands started going up. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Within a minute, over 1,000 humans had volunteered. Sergeants had to physically hold back soldiers who didn't make the cut. Dr. Mirai watched from the observation deck, tears running down her face. A Lumini officer stood beside her, its form flickering with incomprehension. How can they do this? It asked. How can they volunteer to die? They're not volunteering to die, Mirai said. They're volunteering to fight, to protect others, to make their lives mean something. That's the difference between your people and mine. You see death as the end of everything. We see it as the price we sometimes pay for things that matter more. The battle preparations took 2 weeks. Coalition forces gathered at the Aegis line. 400 warships from a dozen species formed defensive positions around 3 critical systems. The human fleet positioned itself at the center, the tip of the spear. Lieutenant Nari worked 20-hour days preparing the medical facilities. She trained coalition medical staff in trauma procedures that horrified them, how to treat patients who were still fighting, how to prioritize the salvable over the critical, how to keep working when you were exhausted and scared and grieving. This is barbaric, a Thalorn medic protested. We cannot treat patients without proper protocols and rest periods. In 2 weeks, you won't have time for protocols, Nari said bluntly. People will be dying faster than you can save them. You'll have to choose who gets treatment first. You'll have to work until you collapse. I'm teaching you how to survive that. Sergeant Hyun drilled his Marines until they moved like one organism. He taught them Vrex ship layouts, close combat techniques, emergency procedures. He made them practice until they could navigate a bioship blindfolded. He pushed them until they were ready for anything. "Some of you won't come back," he told them on the last day of training. "I wish I could promise otherwise. But I can promise this: you won't die alone, you won't die for nothing, and you'll save lives that matter." Private Una prepared demolition charges and mapping equipment. She would lead one of the boarding teams, hitting a Vrex command ship at the height of battle. She was scared. Everyone was scared. But fear was just data. It told you the stakes were high. It didn't tell you to quit. The Vrex arrived exactly when intelligence predicted. 12,000 bioships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that blotted out the stars. They moved like a living thing, pulsing and flowing toward the Coalition defensive line. The battle began. Coalition ships opened fire at maximum range. Missiles and energy beams tore into the Vrex formation. Hundreds of bioships died in the first minutes, but they kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. Taman watched the tactical display with cold focus. The Vrex were pushing hard on the left flank, trying to overwhelm the Lumini battleships stationed there. If they broke through, they could cut off half the Coalition fleet. "All human ships, follow my lead. We're reinforcing the left flank." The Indomitable and its sister ships charged into the heaviest fighting. Vrex weapons tore at their armor, systems failed, hull breaches opened, people died. But the humans kept fighting, kept moving, kept standing between the Vrex and the Coalition worlds they threatened. In the medical bay, Nari worked in controlled chaos. Wounded came in faster than she could treat them. Marines with missing limbs, pilots with third-degree burns, engineers crushed by falling equipment. She triaged, treated, and moved on. There was no time for grief, no time for rest, just the next patient, and the next, and the next. The Coalition medical staff watched her work for an hour before they started copying her techniques. They pushed through their training and their fear. They learned to prioritize. They learned to keep moving. They learned that sometimes good enough now was better than perfect later. On the bridge, alarms screamed. The Indomitable had taken critical damage. The port side was a wreck of twisted metal and sparking systems. The ship's power was failing. Life support was marginal. "Captain, we need to fall back for repairs," the engineering officer reported. Taman looked at the tactical display. The left flank was holding, but barely. If the Indomitable left, the line would collapse. Hundreds of thousands would die. "Negative. All power to weapons and shields. Reroute life support if you have to." "Sir, if we stay in this position, we'll be dead in the water within an hour." "Then we fight for an hour." The message went out to all Coalition forces. The UNS Indomitable was staying in position despite catastrophic damage. Other human ships matched the gesture. They stood their ground, taking punishment that would have destroyed any other vessels, buying time with their blood and steel. Admiral Thelvan watched from the command ship, its crystalline form flickering through a rainbow of emotions it had never felt before. Horror at the damage, admiration for the courage, confusion at the choice, and something new, something it had never experienced, the understanding that some things mattered more than survival. "They're dying for us," it whispered. "No," Dr. Mirai said from beside it. "They're fighting for us. There's a difference." The battle raged for 8 hours. When it finally ended, the Vrex were broken. The Coalition had held the line. The Aegis systems were safe, but the cost was terrible. 4 human ships were destroyed or crippled beyond repair. 800 personnel were dead or missing. The Indomitable was a floating wreck, held together by emergency welds and determination. Captain Taman stood on his shattered bridge, looking at the casualty reports. His hands shook. His eyes were red. But his voice was steady when he gave the order to evacuate the crew. "All hands, abandon ship. This is not a drill. Get to the escape pods now." "Captain, what about you?" Nari asked from the medical bay. I'm staying. Someone needs to make sure everyone gets out safely. Sir, please. That's an order, Lieutenant. The crew evacuated. Taman watched them go, making sure every escape pod launched successfully. When the last one was clear, he sat in his command chair and looked at the stars through the shattered view screen. The Indomitable was dying. Its systems were failing one by one. But it had done its job. The line had held. A Vrex dreadnought, wounded and drifting, floated nearby. Taman looked at it and made his choice. He routed all remaining power to the engines and helm controls. The Indomitable began to move, picking up speed despite its shattered hull. This is Captain Taman Kang of the UNS Indomitable. To anyone listening, we held the line. The ship crashed into the Vrex dreadnought at full acceleration. Both vessels exploded in a fireball that lit up the darkness. The blast took out 2 more Vrex ships that had been closing on Coalition evacuation transports. On the command ship, Admiral Thelvan watched the explosion in silence. Around it, Coalition officers from every species stood at attention. They had learned something from the humans. They had learned that some sacrifices were worth making. Some deaths meant something more than just loss. He saved 3,000 lives, Thelvan said quietly. He chose to die so others could live. That's what Deathworlders do, Mireille replied, her voice breaking. They survive. And when they can't survive, they make sure their death matters. The war wasn't over, but the Aegis line had held. The Coalition worlds were safe, and for the first time in the conflict, the Vrex were retreating. 6 months after the Battle of Aegis Line, the war was ending. The Vrex swarm, once unstoppable, was in full retreat. Coalition forces pushed deeper into contested space with each passing day. The difference wasn't just tactics or weapons, it was philosophy. The Coalition had learned to fight like Deathworlders. Commander Hyun Park stood on the bridge of the UNS Resilience, the newest human warship. After Taman's death, Hyun had been promoted to fleet commander. He didn't want the position. He wanted his friend back. But like every human who had ever lost someone important, he honored the dead by finishing what they started. Final approach to the Vrex home cluster, the navigation officer reported. Coalition fleet is in position. Hyun looked at the tactical display. 400 warships from across the galaxy surrounded the last major Vrex stronghold. Human vessels flew alongside Lumini battleships. Thalorn cruisers moved in formation with ships from species humanity had never even heard of 6 months ago. They had learned to work together. They had learned to fight together. All ships, this is Commander Park. Today we end this war. Not with hatred, not with revenge, but with the determination to protect the future. For every world the Vrex destroyed, for every life they took, for every species that called for help, we answer that call today. He paused, thinking about Taman, thinking about all the humans who had died in this war, thinking about the memorial wall on Station Meridian that now held 800 names. We're from Earth, he continued. We know fear. We know pain. We know loss. But we also know something the Vrex never learned. We know that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about making life worth living, for ourselves and for others. The fleet moved forward as one. The Vrex had nowhere to run. Their home cluster was surrounded, their military broken, their expansion ended. But they fought anyway, because that was their nature. They couldn't surrender. They couldn't negotiate. They could only fight until they won or died. The battle was fierce, but short. Coalition ships used tactics learned from humans. Aggressive maneuvers, calculated risks, willingness to take damage to achieve objectives. But they also used something else humanity had taught them: mercy. When Vrex ships tried to flee, they were allowed to escape. When bioships were disabled but not destroyed, they were left alone. "We're not trying to exterminate them," Admiral Thelvan said from the command ship. "We're trying to stop them. There's a difference." That difference mattered. By the end of the day, the Vrek's military was destroyed, but the species itself survived. Cut off from their expansion, forced to live within their home cluster, they would have to learn a new way to exist, or they wouldn't. Either way, they would no longer threaten the galaxy. The Coalition had won. 2 weeks after the final battle, a memorial was unveiled on Station Meridian. It stood in the central plaza where millions of beings passed each day, a simple stone obelisk brought from Earth at enormous expense. 800 names were carved into its surface. Ambassador Hana stood before the crowd, looking at those names. She had negotiated humanity's entry into the Coalition. She had watched humans fight and die for species that had once rejected them. Now, she had to explain why it mattered. "On Earth, we have built thousands of monuments like this," she began. "Every culture, every nation, every city has places where we remember the fallen. We do this because we understand something fundamental about civilization. It isn't free. Someone has to protect it. Someone has to fight for it. Someone has to be willing to pay the price." She touched the stone, her fingers tracing the first name, Captain Taemin Kang. These 800 humans came to the stars knowing they might not return. They fought not because they were fearless, but because they were brave. They died not because they wanted to, but because others needed to live. That is the Deathworld legacy. Not that we accept death easily, but that we understand it's sometimes necessary. The crowd, thousands of beings from dozens of species, stood in absolute silence. Many of them had served alongside humans. They had learned the Deathworld doctrine. They had seen what humanity could do. "The galaxy called us barbarians," Hana continued. "They said we were too violent, too primitive, too short-lived to matter. They were wrong. We matter because we choose to matter. Because we fight for things greater than ourselves. Because we understand that civilization is built on the sacrifices of those who came before and protected by those willing to stand guard today." She stepped back from the monument. "The war is over. The Vreks are defeated. The Coalition is safe, but the lessons remain. Remember what these 800 taught you. Remember that survival requires courage. Remember that peace requires guardians. Remember that sometimes the price of civilization is high, but it's always worth paying." In a laboratory on Station Meridian, Dr. Mireille Song finished her life's work. The book was called The Deathworld Thesis: Why Earth's Harshest Lessons Became the Galaxy's Greatest Gift. It would become required reading in every Coalition military academy for centuries to come. The thesis was simple, but profound. Species that evolved on easy worlds developed advanced technology and long lifespans, but they never learned to handle loss. They couldn't accept casualties. They couldn't push through pain. They couldn't fight when the cost was high. These species built beautiful civilizations, but they were fragile. When a true threat emerged, they crumbled. Earth had taught humanity differently. Every human alive was descended from survivors. People who endured ice ages and plagues, who rebuilt after disasters, who kept going when everything seemed hopeless. That inheritance made humans seem brutal to other species, but it also made them the only ones capable of defending the civilization everyone shared. "The galaxy needs Deathworlders," Mireille wrote in her conclusion. "Not because violence is good, but because protection requires people who can face violence and not break. Not because death doesn't matter, but because there are things worth dying for. Not because Earth is special, but because it taught us lessons the rest of the galaxy never had to learn, until now." In the medical complex on Station Meridian, Lieutenant Nari Choi accepted her new position as Surgeon General of the Coalition Defense Force. She would develop training programs that taught alien medical staff how to function under combat conditions, how to prioritize patients, how to work while exhausted, how to grieve and keep going. "You're teaching them to be more like humans," a reporter said during her first press conference. Nari smiled sadly. No, I'm teaching them to be more like survivors. There's a difference. On the training grounds of a military base orbiting Lumini Prime, Lieutenant Yuna Han commanded the 1st Integrated Special Operations Unit. Half human, half alien. They trained together under 1.4 gravities. They practiced boarding actions in hostile environments. They learned to function through pain and fear. A young Lumine soldier, its crystalline form still adapting to the high gravity, asked Yuna a question that would be repeated across the galaxy. How do you do it? How do you keep fighting when everything hurts? Yuna thought about Earth, about growing up in the Mars stations, where one mistake meant death, about the mission into the Vrex bioship where she had been sure she would die, about all the times humans had pushed through pain because there was no other choice. You do it because you have to, she said. Because someone is counting on you. Because giving up means people die. Because pain is temporary but regret is forever. You do it because that's what survival means. The soldier's crystalline form pulsed with understanding. The death world doctrine. No, Yuna corrected. Just survival. Earth taught us that. Now we're teaching you. 1 year after the war's end, humanity had transformed the galaxy. Coalition species that had once been unable to accept any casualties now had military forces that could fight effectively. They still valued life more than humans did. Their long lifespans made each loss more significant. But they had learned to accept that sometimes protection required sacrifice. The changes went beyond military matters. Coalition species began to study Earth's history, trying to understand how humans had survived their harsh planet. They read about wars and disasters, famines and plagues, all the countless times humanity had faced extinction and somehow endured. Some found it horrifying, others found it inspiring, but all of them understood that they were alive because humans had been willing to fight for them. Commander Hyun stood alone on the observation deck of the Resilience, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, Taemin's atoms drifted through space, mixed with the debris of the Indomitable. 800 humans had died in this war, 800 names carved in stone. Was it worth it? He asked the empty room. No one answered. But Hyun knew what Taemin would have said. He would have pointed at the coalition worlds, safe and thriving, at the billions of lives that continued because someone had been willing to fight, at the galaxy that had learned it could defend itself. Of course it was worth it. That was the Deathworld legacy, the understanding that some things mattered more than personal survival, the knowledge that civilization required guardians, the willingness to stand between danger and those who couldn't protect themselves. Earth had taught humanity these lessons across millions of years of harsh evolution. Now humanity had taught them to the galaxy in less than a year of desperate war. On Earth, in a small house in the Korean countryside, Taemin's mother received a message from Ambassador Hana. It contained a video of the memorial ceremony, showing her son's name carved in stone. It contained letters from coalition citizens he had saved. It contained a medal that meant nothing to her, because no honor could replace her child. But it also contained something else. A message from Admiral Thelvan, speaking slowly so the translation would be clear. Your son taught us that death is not the end of meaning. He taught us that sacrifice is not weakness. He taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to fight despite it. He saved my people. He saved countless worlds. He changed the galaxy forever. I cannot give him back to you, but I can promise that we will never forget what he did for us. We will never forget what all humans did for us. We will honor them by building a galaxy worth their sacrifice. Taemin's mother watched the video 3 times. Then she placed the medal in a box with her son's childhood drawings and school awards. She walked outside and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was safer because of what her sun had done. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived in peace because humans from Earth had been willing to fight for them. Somewhere out there, other species were learning the lessons Earth had taught across its harsh history. The stars burned cold and distant. But the galaxy was a little warmer, a little safer, a little more prepared for the darkness. Because the Deathworlders had answered when someone called for help. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not violence, not fearlessness, but the simple understanding that survival sometimes required courage. That civilization required guardians. That some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth remembering forever. The memorial on Station Meridian would stand for 10,000 years. The names carved in stone would weather and fade, but the lesson would remain. When someone calls for help, you answer. When darkness threatens, you stand guard. When the cost is high, you pay it anyway. That was the Death World Doctrine. That was humanity's legacy. That was why, when aliens called for reinforcements, the Deathworlders from Earth arrived. And the galaxy was never the same.